Welcome to my budget deck channel where I try to make decks as cheap and playable as possible. So if this is something you're interested in, then why not subscribe? Today with a bit of a different deck. I crafted it, so it's going to land on my channel, even if I'm not very convinced that it's not this specific variant that I'm not happy about. It is Tindangles and Krawlers, well, basically every flip deck that is not Guru control that I'm not very happy about. And I want to tell you why. Because these decks kind of rely on your battle phase. And what do we think of decks that rely on the battle phase? Usually not very good. And the reason for this is because you have hardly any way to like flip up monsters, and it's a bit like monarchs and ritual decks and stuff. You need so many components. You need a flip monster, you need a way to flip them up, and then you actually need a good payoff for the flip, because the flip is literally just like Krawler Spine, pop one monster, like that's nice, but you use 2 cards for it instead of like other decks that achieve that with using just 1 card. So it's a bit strange, but this is the best variant I could come up with. This is the most fun I've had playing them as well, but it's not very competitive. You can, against certain other grind decks, actually have quite a fun match and a bit of a back and forth, but most combo decks just instantly destroy you on your first turn, because like I said, neither Krawlers nor Tindangles really have any play they can do besides stalling. It's not much they can do to disrupt your opponent. Either have World Legacy Pawns plus a set Spine, where you have some of the other trap cards that you run, which aren't even archetypal specific. So there's not all that much that you can do, but I still tried to make it happen, and this is the list I came up with, and I'll be talking about why this is the list I came up with. We run triple Krawler Spine because this is, like I said, the only way of actually getting this card off. Yeah, what can you do? This is the way to go. 1 Krawler Axon if you play against back row decks. Technically you kind of could play this card too, because if you play a matchup that you can win, it will mainly be against back row decks, so you might want to actually focus more on the whole destroying back row and just instantly surrendering against any kind of combo deck. Which, does that sound good? No, not really. So we try to compensate this with playing a triple Spine. We want Krawler Glial. Technically you want more of this card, but also only technically, because if you have to set this card first turn, it does absolutely nothing unless you have a Krawler in hand or in your graveyard, which a lot of the time, since this is not pure build, you might not have. So this card 1 is fine because you have billions of ways to search this card out and even recover this card. I'll be talking about this in a second. There's a massive conga line of monsters that recover themselves, recover other cards, and you will not run out of resources if your opponent already ran out of resources, but that is what this kind of deck does. 1 Krawler Dendrite, you could technically bump this card up to 2, but ratios in this mix specifically are quite hard to get right, because you have to have enough cards in your deck that are Krawler or World Legacy cards for World Legacy Survivor, and also you have to have enough Tindangle cards in your deck for stuff like Nagel's Protection if you mill it, for stuff like Dholes effect and so on. So you have to get it exactly right, so you don't end on something that apparently does nothing. So 1 Dendrite is fine. The good thing is you can send any monster, not just a Krawler monster, so you can send quite a lot of stuff. You can send Dholes, for example, which is quite nice. You can send World Legacy World Chalice, which I'll be talking about in a second. So this card actually has a lot that it can do. Next up, triple, one of the best Tindangle cards ever printed is, I don't even try to pronounce his name, the triangle guy, or pyramid guy if you want to be into the 3D geometry. Then this card is a level 3 Fiend, which you'd think can do quite a lot by itself, because that seems to be a very good stat, considering stuff like Burning Abyss and whatnot. Other than that, this card is a free discard, so you can get cards to the graveyard, which is quite important in this deck actually. And also it is your main play starter because it can send cards to the graveyard from your deck. So that triggers certain effects that can get you some more presence, which is important. It also gets stuff out of your hand, which is why you kind of want to have a good Tindangle count, because then you want to send Tindangle, discard a Tindangle from your hand, then possibly send Dholes, for example, and then special summon that Tindangle back from your graveyard that you send. So you already have 2 monsters on board, and then maybe set 1 Krawler, so you have 3 monsters on board. And if your opponent then summons 1, what does that make? Yes, 4 monsters, so Needle Sealing will be live. So this is like why this card works very well, because this card, in comparison to Torrential Tribute, only destroys all face-up monsters, and that is exactly what you try to not have. So you can actually nuke your opponent's board 1 time for free if you have this card, and 3 face-down monsters on board. And even if you only have 2, it usually still works, so that is quite nice. Also, this card is like your main way of getting the second effect of Delaunay, you know, the good trap card live. And because that's the case, we run triple Spirit of the Fall Wind. it's not a very good card, especially if you get disrupted with it. It's terrifying because, you know, you won't be doing all that much then. But this card is an easy way and a cheap way to search Yugioh Tindangle. So we do run it at 3. You could try a variant that doesn't run it and run good cards instead. But like I said, since most of the flip cards only have their flip effects and do nothing else really, you probably have to run these kind of cards to make the deck more consistent. You could also like splash 1 or 2 more Tindangles in, maybe run stuff like Allure of Darkness so you can dig for these cards a bit more, but the draw 2 rarely does anything, and I felt like the Spirit of the Fallen actually does more in terms of the searching. We run 2 Tindangle Angel. This card is very good, specific in this variant. You would run 3 if the space wasn't so incredibly tight in this deck, because this card can actually summon any flip monster from your hand or your Griever in face down defense position, which also works on stuff like your Glial. So you can just have like this infinite conga line of, oh no, I'm summoning Angel, Angel summons Glial, Glial summons Deus X-Krawler, and so on, or summons Dendrite, Dendrite then sends Dholes, Dholes then summons Tindangle Angel, and that is like the point where it becomes really fun and really annoying for your opponent. But obviously it's a long way till you get this line going on. We run 1 Tindangle Trinity just for the different names as well, because you do need 3 Tindangles with different names, and this card seemed to be okay. The problem is we only can cram 1 base Gardna in this deck, and this card depends on 2 things: having a base Gardna deck to do anything with their effects. So if we mill this card, if we draw this card, Trinity isn't live, and second effect, Gurgan's End, which we also don't run because we could accidentally mill it with the Krawler cards. Also, it's kind of a break, and we, since this is a budget deck, we only run 1 cute Cerberus, which is also problematic because you kind of want to run at least 2, and yeah, that is why this card might not be as good as you think it would be. If you want to run a different Tindangle card, you could run Hound. Problem with Hound is obviously this is a level 7 and we already run so many high level monsters that clog up our hand, so this card could also be problematic. I didn't include it because it's super rare. It does a lot and I help you finish games, but it's not very game deciding, so I felt like you get away with not running it. You could run Tindangle Protector, sounds good. Well, problematic with Protector is you can change up attack position, defense position monsters, which if you just set this card, it does absolutely nothing. And if all of those monsters are Tindangle monsters that you flipped up, then you can add cards to your hand. But since you run a Krawler package, you a lot of the time will not only be flipping up Tindangles, so you won't even get the surge, and then it just feels a bit silly. So I felt like in the end Trinity is the best. You could run 3 Angel if you want. You still have enough Tindangle names and the combo still work even without Trinity, so technically you can get away with it. But yeah, if you have 2 base Gardners, this card is a bit better, but this card in a slower game would be a lot better than it is in this specific day and age. World Legacy, World Chalice, a card you might ask yourself, why is this in here? First of all, we could mill it with the World Legacy Survivor. Second of all, we could add it to our hand with World Legacy Survivor, which is quite important. Third of all, you can discard it with the good Tindangle, and you can send it to the graveyard with Dendrite. You can, I think you cannot, which is very important, you cannot discard it with Nagel's Protection because that only works on Tindangle cards, but you can send it to the graveyard with Knightmare Phoenix, and you could even use it for the fusion of Shaddoll Winda together with Construct. So there's so many ways of getting this card from your hand into the graveyard, and also there's ways of getting this card onto the field. If you summon a card with you know, the good Tindangle, and then you can normal summon this over it in theory. You could do it if you summon a base Gardner because you already have a set card because of the good Tindangle. I'm not trying to pronounce his name. You can really see how hard I'm trying not to mispronounce it. So there's quite a few ways. For example, with the World Legacy in Shadow, you special summon a Krawler. If you have a bad one, for example, then you normal summon this card over it, and so on. There's ways of getting this card out of their hand, and then it actually has an effect. And plus, the next turn, it searches you important cards like World Legacy Survivor and World Legacy Pawns, which is very important. I feel like this card does more than the World Armor does, because you cannot easily normal summon this card, and flip summoning a monster will be very hard at the early stages of the game. In the late game, it's fine. You could technically decide to run this card, but I felt like World Chalice actually does more. One base Gardna, you need it for your Link monster, but other than that, if your opponent really want to call by the grave this, so your Link monster loses attack, yes, be my guest, okay, then some of your plays are screwed up, but it's not just the Tindangle Link monster that does stuff for you. So in the end, I feel like one base Gardna is fine. There's so many ways of you getting it to your hand, sending it to the graveyard. The problem is it's not a flip monster, so you cannot search it with this one, but it doesn't really matter all that much, because since it isn't a flip monster, it does surprisingly little, and the whole second effect of if your opponent Link monster points to this, it doesn't come up as much as you'd think. So I think one is actually fine, but if you can somehow cram the second one in there, you could technically, really technically cut another one of this if you really want to run a second base Gardner, but it's kind of a brick in your hand because you won't be Link summoning your first turn, and even if you special summon it to one of your set monsters, what good is that going to do you? A 2,300 attack defense point block? Nah, it's not that great. This card is very great actually, Tindangle Dholes. This card is a lot better obviously if you run a pure variant, because then you'll have more Tindangles in your graveyard, but this card can easily be triggered by sending it off of the good one, and by being sent off of Survivor if you already have a Tindangle in your graveyard, which obviously the higher Tindangle count you run, the more likely you will have this scenario that works. But problematic is, the more Tindangles you run, the less Krawlers you run, and the less Krawlers and stuff you run, the less often you will get World Legacy Survivor actually off to get stuff into the graveyard. So a bit of a give and take, but usually this card comes in very, very handy, plus it sends a spell trap from your deck to the graveyard. In theory, what you could be playing is, that I forgot to actually put in here, is this card, specifically this card, because this card has an amazing graveyard effect, not only a good field effect, but also amazing graveyard effect, where you can special summon one Krawler monster from your hand, deck, or graveyard to zone this card that Link monster points to in face down defense position, and you could easily send this card to the graveyard with stuff like Tindangle Dholes. So if you want to, this card is actually not terrible, but since it's not pure Krawler deck, I did not want to include it because it can be quite bricky. You could run it instead of one of the field spells, for example. It's fine. Double Intruder, I kind of like this card at 3, because if you discard it with the good one, then you can actually use its effect instantly, because then you summon this card out, and then you can summon Intruder from your graveyard, and you don't have to do the whole Dholes kind of combo. But if you send this to the graveyard with the effect of this one, then it doesn't work, because like it's not the right order and stuff, and then this whole effect does not trigger, so you have to basically special summon it with Dholes then, for example, which if you discard that from your hand, for example, then that is the play as well. We run one Deus X-Krawler because this card is just nuts. It's not really a turbo this card out kind of deck, but it's a deck that can make this card, that can search this card. The problem is, I think this also doesn't count as a flip monster. I'm not actually sure. No, it does, because sometimes I get confused because some of the monsters have like flip here, but the flip thing that this refers to is the one in the effect. Don't know why they make a difference with these two. It is what it is, but yeah, this card is searchable by lots of stuff, and you will be able to summon it out with Glial a lot of the time with Tindangle Angel, because Angel does not have a level restriction, mind you, so this is quite nice. You get into graveyard quite often with stuff like Dendrite, and so on, with stuff like Survivor, so this is actually a very good card in the grind game to shut down your opponent for good and actually finish off the game. World Legacy Survivor, very good, get stuff into the graveyard, which you have lots of, like the Tindangle Trap card, for example, like the Dholes, for example, like Chalice, for example. Even some Krawlers in the graveyard aren't too bad. Intruder in the graveyard is good, so this card actually is quite nice, but beware, it locks you into Link summoning, which usually isn't that terrible. Yes, you cannot go into your Winda combo, but it doesn't really matter most of the time anyway. World Legacy in Shadow is not only good to summon a Krawler out of your hand, it is also good with, in general, flip monsters, because when your flip monster is destroyed by battle with an opponent's monster, you can send that opponent's monster to the graveyard. It doesn't target, it doesn't destroy. Very, very good. And a lot of opponents don't read this effect because they think, oh yeah, it's just an extender for Krawlers, and it is not. It actually works with any kind of flip monster. Nagel's protection, funny enough, it is protection for your monsters, but it's also kind of an OTK tool a bit. So this card is very, very good. And if this card is sent to the graveyard, you can easily get it, well, not recover itself, but recover a card with the same name from your deck. So kind of itself, but not the same card, obviously. Neil Sealing already said enough of this card. This card is actually quite good in flip decks that can build up some field presence. Delaunay, I run at 2, you could cut it down to 1. This card is usually very good, especially in like a pure Tindangle deck. The problem is you need 3 monsters in graveyard and the effect to get any of these effects, really. And you already run enough bricks with flip monsters as it is, so you don't really want to open up with 2 Delaunay in your hand and it's doing absolutely nothing for you. So I feel like 2 is fine because you have so many ways of sending it to the graveyard, and if you really get the effect to summon 3 from your graveyard off 3 times in one game, then kudos, but usually you either won or have lost by that point. Solemn Judgment, a good card you basically get for free in these Master Pack bundle deals, so I wanted to include that card because it stops a lot of spell trap removal, it stops a lot of like opponent's good plays, so you can actually survive a turn. I think this card is good, but you can obviously run any other disruptive cards that you like. And Pawns, because that is very good in a flip deck and even better in a Krawler deck because it can actually shuffle Krawlers back into the deck. So your Krawler's second effects are live, and then reflip cards, which is very important. For the extra deck, if you want to save some money, don't run the whole Shaddoll package. You don't have to. It does sometimes something, but it's not overly necessary. It's quite nice with the Krawlers because you can easily go into Construct because you have the field spell and then have some of the Krawlers and then have 2 flip monsters. The problem is if you used Survivor before, then you can't use the effect. That's what it is, but we will play around this. 1 Phantom Knights for the Krawlers. It's an Xyz monster, does stuff fine. Volcasaurus is actually quite nice in this deck because you have quite a lot of level 5s, and this card can finish the game by burning your opponent for enough damage, which is nice sometimes. We run 1 Krawler. Doesn't come up all that often, but it can come up sometimes. Usually you don't want to have a Link 2 sitting in your main zone, but these arrows are actually better for a lot of other stuff, so I decided to do it like this. But you could technically play any of the other X-Krawlers and you like, because you can only make them with the Krawlers anyway, so it doesn't really matter about their effects and stuff because that's not what you play them for. You play them for their floating effect. 1 very important card, Subterra Behemoth Fiendess. This card is insane if you can get the effects off, mainly because it searches and it special summons from your hand, so this is very good in the grind game for you too, because you will have lots of board presence if the game goes right for you, and this card gets you even more and gets it can get quite nutty, this card, I have to say. Already talked about the Shaddoll stuff because your monsters are many dark. Knightmare Phoenix is a good card to discard stuff like your Nagel's Protection, like your Legacy World Chalice, or your Delaunay, and deals with back row decks, which are your biggest enemies because that's the decks that you technically can beat at least. So this card is quite important. Puzzlomino, just another generic Link 2 stuff that is cheap. Same with Progleo, you run so much Link stuff that sometimes you want to be getting links back from the graveyard. Geonator Transverser can be very nice to steal your opponent's actually good monsters and give them one of your monsters, which is quite nice because they don't have to be face up, so you can give your opponent a flip monster and then actually run them over by battle and stuff. It's somewhat the same as Euler's Circuit in that kind of regard. 1 Decode Talker, because you get it for free in this structure deck, and it's an okay Link 3. 1 Tindangle Acute Cerberus, because this card is somewhat strong. It's not very good, plus you have like a base Gardna in your graveyard, but it's okay, and even if you just use it for link climbing, that's still fine. Powercode Talker, very good cards, negate some effects. Steel Star Regulator, it's okay, I guess. You have quite high level monsters, so this card can be coming in handy sometimes, and you do run Xyz, so the effect might possibly work as well. And Rasterliger, because you get the card for free, so you get Link 4. Obviously access code and these kind of things are a lot better, but be that as it may, this card in this specific variant actually isn't terrible because you will be able to boost its attack and be able to destroy cards on your opponent's field because you have such field presence at one point with cards like Intruder, Angel, Glial, and so on. There will be so much special summoning that you will always have cards pointing to the zones. You technically could play Linkaribo for the tokens. Felt like that wasn't an inclusion in a budget deck, but you could have. Cards that are mentionable. AD Changer, you can send it easily to the graveyard by discarding it or by sending it by World Legacy Survivor, and you can then instantly flip your monsters. It tried it out, obviously it's too bricky and stuff like that, but you could run it if you want to. Same for Terrifying Toddler of Torment. In a pure variant, this could be nicer, and also you can send it to the graveyard with stuff like World Legacy Survivor, but you want to max out on the Krawler and Tindangle names, so this card kind of doesn't feel right in the deck. You maybe could run it instead of Spirit of the Fallwind, but even then I don't think that does much. It does some stuff for needle sealing, but that's roundabout all it really is good for. Stuff like Topologic Bomber Dragon actually can be quite nice. Appaloosa technically could be, but usually it's only good if you like really get it off the first turn, and the rest is stuff against hand traps, which you will not be running. You could be running Foolish Burial Goods, but don't really feel like you need to. In a pure variant it makes more sense, but in this variant I feel like it is wasted crafting material. Hope you enjoyed the deck profile. I went a bit in depth with the whole deck profile because I really like the deck. Not that it's good, but I like talking about it because it has ups and downs that I like to go over with you guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, but most importantly, I hope you have a good day.